Let us now start with our first chapter on classical theory and classical sociology. So, here we are going to look at why is it that we study classical thinkers in the first place. First, let's try and understand what classical means. Okay, when we are talking about classical, anything which is classical, we are talking about things which are relevant and true in all time, in various times, not in the same era. So, when we're talking about classical sociological thinkers, we are basically talking about people who made contributions to starting this as an academic subject. All right. So, obviously, when sociology started, the context, the situation, the social conditions, the approach towards religion, the approach of religion towards people and towards genders and towards class, and the existence of various institutions, the conditions were very different from the way they are today. However, the theories that were developed in those days, many of them became very strong reference points for what we study today. In essence, they constituted a permanent body of knowledge which became the common referring point for sociologists in all areas in the world and in different times. Now, because these thinkers contributed to the creation of a coherent and permanent body of knowledge, we usually start from a study of what these classical thinkers thought and how they treated various sociological phenomena and social facts. So that is important. Before we go and talk about the different classical sociologists, let's look at how the classical sociologists saw sociology. So for them, sociology was a science. It was very simple. It was a science with the human being as its subject matter, but human beings living together in societies. We are not here concerned with the anthropology. We are not here concerned about the psychology of human beings. Okay, so when you are talking about the subject matter of society, that divides into two parts. You are interested in how those societies developed, so that's related to the history of society, and what are the various uh, placement patterns of various institutions which constitutes the structure and the larger configurations of human society. So the subject matter is the society, but then in order to study society, you cannot do it without studying the history and the structure. Please do keep in mind that these early sociologists, and yes, here I will definitely want to acknowledge that some material that I have taken here is from Professor in the University of Amsterdam. So some of these classical sociologists. They made the contributions, but there's one thing which is common between them, and a few things are common between them. Firstly, many of them did not go to any university to study sociology. Why? Because sociology was not offered as a subject in those days. In fact, the name sociology also did not exist. We will see what the name was. But these are some of the earliest sociologists who contributed to sociological theory. The first among them was Comte, who's right in the middle. Then there is Durkheim. Then there's Tocqueville. There's Smith, the great Mr. Adam Smith, the writer of the classical book, The Wealth of Nations, and Weber, the founder of the theory of rationality and bureaucracy, and then of course Marx, and then later on Elias. Of course, Tocqueville is also there. All right, but in this series, we are going to look at these four important sociologists: Auguste Comte, who lived between 1798 to 1857; Durkheim, 1858 to 1917; Karl Marx, known to everybody practically, those who lived from 1917 to anywhere between 1991. They lived through the time that was defined by Karl Marx and his theories. Of course, the millennials would know less about him, but of course, we are going to talk about him. And then there's Max Weber. We live when we talk about bureaucracy and we talk about capitalism, the linear development of society, especially in the context of Calvinism, we talk about Max Weber. All right. So, was there a problem with these gentlemen? I mean, these people were great, and we all know that they were great. But of course, all idols have clay feet. So did they? When we study them, are we going to recognize that maybe they had some problems? If you look at them, well, they were people who studied knowledge from its source. I mean, that was one privilege that we don't get. Okay, they were really lucky. They were studying things as things were developing. All right, they did not have to go to a university to uh, get their conclusions verified. So they did not write conclusions which were then to be vetted by a committee of pedantic PhD degree awarders. Okay, no, they just wrote down what they found out to be true, and thereby straight away they created their own schools of thought. Okay, why are we studying them today? Because they studied phenomena that arose in modernity. Okay, let's say when I mark the era, I usually start from 1750, but you can go back to 1680s and see that maybe modernity started there. People will disagree, but in order to keep things convenient, I start from 1750. That is when modernity was in full swing, and we were faced with issues like secularism. On the social front, there was secularism. We will see what that is. On the economic front, there was industrialization. Of course, we all had the industrial age. And then, with the coming of the French Revolution, we saw the end of the monarchies in Europe and the development of constitutional monarchies in various parts of the world, like England. Uh, Around the same time, the end of the 18th century, something was developed in the United States, and it was the cotton gin. The cotton gin led to a revolution in cotton production and the development of further plantations further south in the United States. Of course, that also went hand in hand with a very evil form of slavery developing in the United States. But these are things that were happening in modernity. This is all modern development. Why is it important to study modernity and the things that existed at that time? Because today we are living in the spin-off or in the effects that were created by modernity as it started then. So secularism hasn't gone away, democracy hasn't gone away, industrialization hasn't gone away. And if we want to study the effects of secularization, democratization, a reawakening of religion, and a reawakening of the democratic process, then we must go back and have a look at modernity and where it started and how it started. This is a pre-modern farm. Okay, there was farming. Okay, there's one more thing. People think that there was agriculture in the pre-industrial age. There's no agriculture today. That's not true. There was agriculture then, there is agriculture now, but the main thing is that even today, the agriculture that you see, that has become highly mechanized. Previously there was agriculture, but it was more manual. There was no mechanization, there was no industrialization. Today it has become more mechanized. Today we see the presence of machines on the farms, and it is a very important part of modernity. So these men, let's look at these men. What was the problem with them? The first problem was that these were men. Okay, there is no woman among these initial classical sociological thinkers. So did they have a gender bias? Maybe. They were all Europeans. Many of them were French, by the way. We had one German, and so on. So maybe they had a regional bias. Maybe they looked at things purely from the eyes of Europeans. Probably they did not even travel out of Europe. Thirdly, they all belong to the middle class. These classical thinkers were neither completely the upper class, nor did they come from the lower working class. They were all from the middle. So, did they have a class bias? Uh, did they have another kind of bias? For example, now um, this is the picture of an Arab sociologist, Ibn Khaldun. Now, Ibn Khaldun is normally considered to be the father of sociology, but the European thinkers do not start there. They start from Auguste Comte, who was European. Of course, this was Arab. I think he was Moroccan, and he lived in the 15th century. So they don't start there. Maybe is it because there is a pro-Europe bias? Maybe. Okay. Another thing about classical thinking is that sociology is one of those few sciences where you do not start from the very recent. When you start studying something, you do not start from the most state of the art. When you are studying a phone, you will probably look at the mobile phone first, the most advanced mobile phone first. No one is going to take you back to the age of Graham Bell and show you a very old a very old telephone which was created at that time. That does not happen in physics. In physics, if you are looking at an aircraft, you are going to look at the A380 or the 747. You're not going to look at Flyer 1, which was created in 1903. That's not the model, that's not where you start. So that's very distant. 1903 is very distant. You don't start with Newton and Jabir and Hayyan when you're studying chemistry or physics. You start with the very latest. But in sociology, that's not the case. You start with the old, and you start with the more complicated. In a sense, so it makes it a little more complicated that you have to go back so far, and then you have to start your study. But once you do that study, that is your main advantage becomes that you now have access to a body of knowledge which everyone can relate to, whether you go to Europe or you go to the Arab world. You mention these classical thinkers, and everybody knows what you're talking about. Okay, so this is a little bit about classical theory and the importance of classical theory. I will continue with this discussion on classical theory, and I will discuss the first classical theorist, who is Auguste Comte, in the next video. Thank you very much indeed.